Hi, I'm JJ. Welcome or welcome back. So it is March, so it is Women's History Month, and instead of doing a bunch of female authors or books with female protagonists, which I do have in here, but I actually wanted to do a discussion, a short history lesson in my version of history, along with a lot of book recommendations and my TBR. And so it kind of all started from reading, and I had just finished the book Nobody's Girl, about one of the victims of the Jeffrey Epstein horribleness. And I have a video where I wrap it up and talk in more detail there. But it made me think of other books that were similar, and then I kind of spiraled from there. So just to kind of give you a little way of how my brain works, the books that are similar to it, and then all the ideas for a discussion that sped off from there. I know that it looks like a murder board, and it's very disjointed, but I hope that you bear with me and find this at least a portion as fascinating as I did, because when I was doing all these interconnections and stuff, I was interested and excited, so I wanted to do this specific video for that, but we'll see how it goes. I read Nobody's Girl, like I said. Last year I read Know My Name by Chanel Miller, which was also another, it was a rape of this woman at a girl at a college party by a guy who tried to argue that her being unconscious, that she gave him permission prior to her being unconscious or whatever, and then that he shouldn't be punished for his 10 or 15 minutes of fun. And so she and the survivor from Nobody's Girl, they both took on the system essentially and fought for their justice. They're very inspirational people, so they definitely should be some people who are honored, not just this month, but in general, for their strength. But it then made me think of women throughout history, and that's where this kind of timeline goes. So I also just listened to Messalina, which is one of the empresses of Rome. She was one of the wives of Emperor Claudius. And then how, like, the book was introduced as how, there's not a whole lot that we know for sure about her, because it was written by, after the fact, by men, but also with a certain kind of propaganda in mind on how to basically villainize these women. So you have Messalina, you have Agrippina, which was another of the empresses, another wife of Claudius, sister to, I can't think. So Agrippina is the mother of Nero, and her story itself is fascinating. But you also then have Cleopatra, once again, destroyed by all the propaganda against her. And then you even have, like, as you go, later in time, you have Mary Queen of Scots, you have Queen Elizabeth, you have Anne Boleyn, especially, Catherine Howard. Both of those were beheaded by their husband, King Henry VIII. Catherine de' Medici, who was villainized, and the way that her story just, kind of exploded with all these different conspiracy theories and how many people she killed. And not all of them are good, because then you have like also Lucretia Borges, who also was believed, a huge poisoner, assassin, like all these horrible murderer type of aspects. So you have all, it's not new in history to villainize the women, especially women who were victims of their circumstances, which many of these were. If you want to read a really great story about Mary Queen of Scots, Catherine de Medici, and Elizabeth, Catherine's daughter, who married the King of Spain, Young Queens is a great story that kind of parallels all their lives in the situations that they were in. It has a lot of letters from each back and forth, because Mary Queen of Scots did marry Francis, which was the King of France, for a little bit, and the son of Catherine de Medici. So she was really close to that family and right in there. So they have a lot of letters and history and stuff to kind of show, shine a light on the truth behind them, besides all of the, fantasies that people have created about how horrible and brutal, especially Catherine de Medici was. And another one, if you are interested in Anne Boleyn and her relationship with her daughter, Queen Elizabeth I, but also her influence on her daughter. Anne Boleyn and Elizabeth I is another good book. And I'm going to mention a whole lot, not going to give a lot of details about them all. I will just, in the my notes, I will give you all the books that I'm referencing with the author name and stuff, so that you don't have to try to remember. And then that got me thinking, okay, so you're thinking about the anti-woman propaganda from, all these generations. So a couple of good books that kind of encompass that. One was Cassandra Speaks, and that talks about a lot of women throughout history, that their myth of them outweighs the truth of them, and it's often distorted. So Cassandra was, during the Trojan War, she was the prophetess who warned them about the impending doom, and nobody listened. So it's just the idea of, with even when women try to speak the truth, trying to warn of something bad coming, something, the treatment of them, anything like that, people don't listen. And so it follows, it talks about Cassandra. It also talks about Eve and how she was villainized throughout the myth in the biblical version of creation, where she was the reason for the fall of man. And it kind of, just throughout history, you get to see all these different women who were either villainized or just not listened to, or the propaganda completely destroyed any reality of their lives. And then another one was a more recent read for me, which was Penelope's Bones. And that is taking the women from Homer's stories, so the Iliad and the Odyssey, and giving them a backstory, and not just a backstory, but like picking other people similar and discussing throughout history. So, like Penelope was the wife of Odysseus. So a wife who has to maintain a household while the husband's away, like taking that kind of historical look at it, and then placing it within a context of other people in history. And then you have, like, it mentioned like Helen of Troy, and and that kind of thing. You have like the mother aspect of different things when you talk about Achilles' mother. And so she tells the story throughout history of the different cultures and how they treat these types of women, the archetypes, whether it's the mother, the wife, the daughter, and different ways that they were viewed within their own societies during the ancient times. They used a lot of archaeology, and it was very interesting just to kind of get that in-depth look on the ancient cultures and how they treated women, just how birthing alone has always been very deadly to women. The mortality rate, especially, you know, the older you go back in time, was very high. And to find out that some of it was not just due to not having the correct technology and stuff at the time, not having the germ therapy needed to keep them safe, but also because they were malnourished, because the food and the rations went to their husbands or their sons or their brothers who were more important in that time period. And so they didn't get to eat adequately enough to bring a full baby to term safely. And then also, if they did, not to have the correct nourishment to then feed their children, breastfeed. And so the children would die early, or the mother would die, or both would die, all just because they were seen as second class, and therefore were not given the amount of food and nutrients that the men and their lives were given. Even just the men have meat, the women do not, or just aspects like that that you don't really think about. And so then that led me to thinking about how, okay, so we're treating people as second-class citizens, and how that goes throughout history. You're not just treating women as second-class citizens, then you have whether you're a different religion or not, which leads to the Holocaust, whether you have mental illness, physical disabilities, also leads to the Holocaust, but it leads to this second-hand account, you know, like you're not quite full citizens, you're not given full human rights because you're less than. Then it leads to, you know, racism, slavery, and, you know, all these start with the idea that one kind of person is not as good as the other. And you can trace it back as far as you want, but, you know, even I just started with the way that women were mistreated, and then trying to follow all the pathways that labeling one wasn't good enough. Okay, now we need to be above this group. Now we have to be above this group. And as long as you keep isolating these different groups, keep separating and having so many different distinct types of people, classes of people, then you need to be higher than each class. So then there becomes this hierarchy where only one person or one group of people will be at the top. And so then that leads to a book that I read last year as well, called Men Who Hate Women. And that one was about all the different ways that the rise of the culture against women right now is morphing. So whether you have they even connected a lot of school shootings and mass shootings, even if they're targeting other races or other religions, a lot of it is still grounded in misogyny. We're mad that our white women are going with these other races. We're mad that our white women are not are not Christian, or that, you know, like all these different things then make them target not just the women, but the men who are stealing their women. And some of the things that they say that women are basically there to service the men. They're not even human. So therefore, and this was a Jeffrey Epstein quote or paraphrase, that you can't, be in trouble for doing these things to women because women are not human enough. It's like the difference, and he said the difference between like murder and like essentially stealing a bagel, because it's an inanimate object and so you can't murder it. You can just, hurt it, eat it, steal it, but you can't murder it because it's not human. And that is absolutely disgusting. But that is what that book is about, is all this rising culture of all these different ways that these groups of men are hating on women, which then led me to all the books that I read. So Know My Name, Nobody's Girl, and then you also have the Five, which are the women that were killed by Jack the Ripper, and another excellent book because you get the stories of those women in their lives, instead of the focus on Jack the Ripper. You get to see kind of what led them down the path. They were not all prostitutes, what like people used to say, and so you get this rich texture of these real human lives that were taken. And then Radium Girls, which is these companies, especially leading into the First World War and stuff. There were factory girls who worked in a radium plant where they were using paint to do the clock dials on watches that were then sent to the soldiers, so essentially they could see in the dark. It was killing these girls. It was poison. But they were targeting young girls. They were targeting women and girls from immigrants, from impoverished girls who needed that money, because then it doesn't matter so much if they die, according to them. And so that just leads to, okay, so once again, we're dehumanizing people. So now it's not just women, but it's classless. So it's, if you don't have enough money, or if you are not, and this was in America, so if you're not American, so if you're immigrant, if you're not born here, so then that leads to our treatment currently of refugees. A really great book about it's fiction, but for the refugee story is the next new Syrian girl, and so it's about these two girls. One is Syrian refugee, and then one is Syrian American, and kind of the dichotomy of the two situations that the girls find themselves in, but still are being, there's still racism towards both of them. And so other ones that are along the same line along with that are The Woman Who Could Not Be Silenced, and that's women in mental illness. So then you have, okay, so not only are they second-class citizens, but once they do start educating themselves, once they do start trying to think for themselves, once they try to defend and fight up for themselves, now they are troublemakers. So we need to silence them. And in order to do that, since I own them, it's my wife, it's my daughter, or whatever, I can declare them mentally insane and throw them in an institution so that they're not my problem anymore. And so that's a story about trying to get women's rights and rights for people who have mental illness versus people who are just shoved away to silence and shut up. And we had lots of places like that throughout history, not just mental institutions, primarily for women. They also were talking in that book about Black people who had mental illness because they did not want to be slaves anymore. Because you were sane if you accepted your part as a slave. You were insane if you wanted your freedom, because that showed that you were not taking the status quo, and therefore you were not, you were insane, which is completely insane. And so you have this just need to control, which then, okay, if it's not, sending them into a mental institution, years before that, it was calling them witches and then burning them, drowning them, however you wanted to get rid of these troublesome women, or women who had more power than you wanted them to. If they were widows and inherited land, and you craved that land, just declare them a witch and, be done with it. There are all these different ways to get rid of them. And so a couple of stories to that point, one would have been, what I just recently read was Hex, which is a 3-person narrative, and one of them was accused of witchcraft, and then they basically wanted her to be killed. But also you have, in the fiction aspect, burial rites, which is another woman, a servant, a slave type of person. She was accused of, and this was in history, but then it was fictionalized for this book, Burial Rites, but she was one of the last women in Iceland to be executed for murder, and it was because she apparently murdered her former master and a friend of his, but you kind of get a more nuanced story and more of a possible what if and what had happened instead. And then on top of not treating people well or sending them away, you also have the immortal life of Henrietta Lacks, which is a Black woman who fought, or actually her family fought rather, because she died young, but her cells were taken without her permission, without her knowledge, to study. And so much of our medical advancement comes from her cancerous cells that they illegally take from her. And they did that to a lot of Black women at that time, so that they could study them, because, nobody cared what happened to them, and nobody thought that their rights mattered, so it didn't matter whether or not they asked for permission for this or not, or gave them compensation for doing it. And then that just leads to the treatment of, people of color, women especially of color, in the medical field in general, and how their mortality rate is still so much higher, especially when you're talking about, when they're pregnant and stuff like that. And so it all kind of is cyclical. And so one that I just also recently read, I Am Nujood, aged 10 and divorced. It's about, the forcing of young girls to become wives. It's essentially slavery and trafficking and all that stuff, but it's not phrased that way in a lot of different cultures. And then that also leads to the fact that, like you read any kind of classic in, especially Victorian era, and, women, their role was to get married, the best match possible, so that they could, their families could be compensated. They would be giving their money directly to their new husband and all that aspect of it. But also we didn't imagine, like, they were so much younger than the men that they were supposed to be marrying. I had the hardest time when I first started getting into classics with how young these girls were. I was reading War and Peace, great story, but man, is it hard to just get into the aspect that, like, the story starts when one of the girls, I think, is like 15, and has suitors and stuff like that who are well beyond her age, and just how much has not changed throughout history in that aspect, going back to what Nobody's Girl was about in the Epstein files, and the trafficking and the young girls that were trafficked by Epstein and Maxwell. But you also have the Me Too movement going on. You have Harvey Weinstein and his harassment and abuse of the women who worked for him and under him. You have Larry Nassar, a doctor who abused so many young girls, gymnasts, and they don't see anything wrong with that because it is their God-given right, and it's about power and control and just knowing that they think that they're untouchable. So fiction that kind of does a really good example of exploring alternatives to that or different reactions to that are Woman at Point Zero, or 0 Point, Woman at 0 Point. And this is about a woman who so it takes place in Egypt, and you have this woman who is on death row, and she's being interviewed by a reporter who wants to know kind of, how did you get here? And she talks about how essentially abuse, sent out to be married to whoever her dad thought she should marry. He ended up being abusive. And you escape from that, and then you end up alone on the streets, and you kind of go into prostitution, which then leads to more abuse, and eventually you just kind of get sick of it and you snap. And so that is what she did, and you get to see the full story of that. So that is nonfiction, or that is fiction, but it's just an interesting concept because of all the other stories that just, that's just the plight of the woman. You just kind of have to take it aspect. So, and then you have My Dark Vanessa, which is the flip side to Lolita. So Lolita is a guy trying to rationalize his lust for his girlfriend's daughter, young daughter. And then you have My Dark Vanessa, which is about a girl who's trying to rationalize the abuse done by her from her teacher when she was 15 through like 19 and 20 and stuff like that. And then the Me Too movement happens. A bunch of other people step up and say what he did, and she has to kind of come to terms with that reality and how she had to rationalize it as a child just to survive it. But now with that all coming crashing down, now she has to try to survive it all over again, knowing the truth. Very hard read, but very worthy. Another one is The Color Purple. Lots of racism, but also abuse and domestic violence and stuff like that, where, as a woman, you just go where you're, so she was abused by her dad, and then sent to marry this guy who was abusive, no say in any of it, and trying to still create a life out of that. So good. First, for the slavery aspect of it, you have Beloved. Shakespeare even took a hit on the treatment of women with Measure for Measure, and also such brutal treatment of women in Titus Andronicus. So it's something that's always been explored. You have his epic poem, The Rape of Lucretia, which is also the myth of the creation of Rome, the Republic, and it, I just, so much of like all the same stuff just continuously happening, and nobody is, it's not ever being fixed. It just keeps repeating and repeating. And then with the Victorian age, I have the recommendations for Tess of the Dubervilles. Once again, the high pressures and expectations put on women of that time to be virtuous. The direct opposite of that would be Therese Requien. I don't know how fully to pronounce that last name, by Emile Zola. You also have Ruth, kind of another way to look at a same kind of story, by Elizabeth Gaskell. She also has North and South, which is a great way to look at poverty and stuff like that, and Wives and Daughters. And then you also have the Bronte sisters. Especially I enjoyed the Tenant of Wildfell Hall, with the basically subverting that expectation on women as well. And then anything Jane Austen, also Little Women has a bit of those expectations for women as well. And then to also subvert it, you have Anna Karenina, you have Rebecca, and then not all the time, and this is what is horrifying, is when women do violence to other women. And that would be what Maxwell did with the Epstein stuff, where she was recruiting the girls that she would then bring as and traffic to Epstein. But you have people like, character-wise, Haversham. So there is a book specifically about Haversham, where you kind of get her backstory, but the story of Great Expectations too, where she was basically her, she was jilted at the altar, and so now she hates men, so she even treats and trains Estella to be brutal towards Pip, which is kind of a different aspect. With Wives and Daughters, you get a very horrible mother who is just no love and concern for her own daughter, and then she tries to marry above her station, and then mistreats the stepdaughter as well. And so it's not just men who hate women. There's women who are doing horrible things to other women as well. One example of that is They Were Her Property, which is about all the women in the United States, the Confederate states, who used or who owned their own slaves. And so in all of that, though, you have every story you're talking about having the women who stand up and fight, the women who will not take it, even if it's at risk to themselves. Whether you're talking about, there's a graphic novel, Wake, which is about the women-led slave revolts. You're talking about all the women who stood up against Epstein, Weinstein, Nassar. They're always, in history, they're always fighting back. You know, Cleopatra, Agrippina, Messalina, Catherine de Medici, they didn't take it lying down, even no matter how hard they had it. And that's what's inspiration about it. Like, I'm talking about all this horrible stuff, but there's always the other side of the coin. There's always the fighting back. When you talk about disability, you have all the people who are fighting for disability rights. When you talk about LGBT community, you have all the people who, trans rights, and just trying to fight this system that is systemically corrupt at its core. Black Lives Matter, like all these, say her name for when they're killing black women, and so then we also have to talk about the treatment of Native Americans and throughout history, and yet we still have people who stand up. And a couple of suggestions also for the power movement. And now my writing is getting much smaller because I couldn't fit it all on here. But you have, sorry, I wish I could read my writing a little better. So with the police brutality fighting back, a great book that I just recently read was Assata. So it's Assata Shakur's autobiography. And then you have always, I Know Why the Cage Bird Sings by Maya Angelou, as well as her poetry. And then I talked about that one. When you're talking about great disability representation, somebody, an older woman dealing with Parkinson's, in the book by Claudia Piñeiro, which is a Argentinian author, and her book Elena Knows is a great book where a woman who is getting older, her Parkinson's getting worse, she can barely get around, but she's still going from city to city, talking to the cops, trying to find out what really happened to her daughter, because she believes that the suicide was not what really happened. And so she's creating her own investigation, despite the fact that her body is not working anymore. And it's a great book about bodily autonomy. And then you also have a completely lighter note, the erotic stories for Punjabi widows, which is talking about how women who are widows are seen as less than people completely. You're over a certain age, your husband's gone, so you no longer matter anymore. But they still have their own desires. They still have their own ambitions and beliefs and hopes and dreams. And it's a really fun story to follow, but has a lot of depth to it, because it's showing how they're not dead yet. They're still alive and they still matter. It's a fiction, but it's such a fun ride. A couple of the darker ones are for Indigenous stories. Tiffany McDaniel wrote Betty. Very great book, but there's a lot of trigger warnings, as if this whole conversation is not a trigger warning, about life, of a girl whose mother is white but has mental illness, and her dad is Cherokee, and just so much, racism, so much family trauma, a lot of stuff that this girl and her family endures. And then Angeline Boley, who has several books out. Firekeeper's Daughter is excellent. And then it has a direct sequel, which is actually third chronologically when it was release date. But she has Sisters of the Wind, and then Warrior Girl Unearthed. And that one is specifically about the burial grounds of Native Americans, the bones and stuff, where they're not, or indigenous, I guess, not just Native Americans, but indigenous people whose bones are in colleges and universities and museums and not returned to their tribes where they belong, so that they can have the proper burial and proper reverence that they deserve. And another one when we're talking about female power is Starstruck, and that's by Serafina El Badri. I forgot. I didn't write the last part of her name. I'll write that down. But she is a astrophysicist astronaut who is part Egyptian, and so it's her biography or her memoir about her childhood, how she got into loving astronomy and the stars, and how she made her dream come true. Really great book. And then kind of along that lines, but showing how hard it was for women to break into that field, is a fiction book called Atmosphere by Taylor Jenkins Reid. And that is about women who first wanted to go up into space, but they were represented the whole gender. So if one of them made a mistake, it kind of set back all women. And so it was very hard to get to be going on in space in a man's field. But it was also written during the 80s, where you have the AIDS epidemic, but also just you still have you went through the whole lavender scare during the 50s and stuff, where everybody hated the LGBT community, and so therefore you could not be LGBT and be in the field to be an astronaut, because they believed that it led to you being able to be blackmailed, and therefore your risk was very high, so that you did get the security clearance needed for these jobs, just because of the idea that you would want to keep it hidden because it's so degrading to be that kind of person. But you had to keep it hidden, because if you were found out, you could be eliminated from your job. So it was a catch-22. So that was another really great story. And then along with all that, kind of goes back into the way that you're thinking less of different people and preying on different types of people would be then cults, and how especially young women and stuff are brought into these cults because they're preyed upon, because they're missing something in their life, or the people who are bringing them in sense that there's this brokenness in them. And very similar to trafficking is the fact that they want to manipulate and control them. And so one that I had recently read about cults was Dinner with Vampires, and I read it because I'm a huge fan of One Tree Hill, and the actress that was playing in it, Bethany Joy Lenz, was in a cult and had to fight to get out. So you get to see how they start trying to warp your mind and stuff, and it's very similar. That's why I made the connection. The way that they were conditioning her was very similar to how Maxwell and Epstein started conditioning the girls that they were abusing and then trafficking. So it's kind of all this this cyclical thing. But I also just wanted to bring up that when I was talking about how women are not the only ones who are targeting other women, or how they're not, innocent in a lot of this stuff, how we can be just as bad as men in so many areas. So it is important to acknowledge and realize that. But it is just as important, since I've talked about such horrific things in this history, that women are not, and girls are not the only ones who are victimized by these predators. And so I would just be remiss to say if I didn't just bring up Sandusky as well, and how he did the same kind of targeting to the young boys. And he was a football coach over at Penn State in the United States. And so it's very much about power and control. And so it doesn't matter who is seeking that control or who they are controlling. It's the same kind of aspect and the same kind of treatment and the same kind of trauma for the survivors. So anyway, I know this is very all over the place, and I know that it is also very down. But I felt like, just like with my reading that I did for Black History Month, yes, you can read Black authors. Yes, you should read women authors. Yes, you should read characters and stuff like that. But we have to acknowledge history. It's History Month. So how we got here. And yeah, it's really great to read all these people and seeing how there's so much more representation these days. But it is also just as important to see how hard it was to get to where we are, and why it's important to have a month. We should be doing it all year round, but a month to highlight the people who made it, the people who are telling these stories, the people who are doing that fight, or the people who are just writing these stories, whether it's fiction or nonfiction. You're still writing a story, and you're still using your voice when so many people have been silenced before. So, and that's including both months, for all the Black lives that were silenced, for all the women that were silenced, for all the Indigenous and disability and mental illness, and all the different ways that people throughout generations had been silenced. It is very important that we're reading those stories and telling those stories. So going back to the Holocaust, everybody, and, the Diary of Anne Frank, but another one that I would suggest would be Address Unknown, where you can kind of see the way that this stuff is insidious and gets into people without their knowledge, and how we have to be vigilant about it. And that's why I thought it'd be important to share the history so that we don't repeat it, even though it's continuously been repeated, but to talk about it so that those voices that kept speaking out aren't silenced, and so that we don't perpetuate the same stuff on the generations after us. I feel like we have that obligation as humans, but also as readers, to pass on. That's why reading is important. You're passing on the knowledge of all the people who came before us. You're passing on their experiences, their wisdoms, their lessons, all the things that they want us to know and to teach the generations that come after us. So we need to be stewards of these kinds of books, even though they're hard to read. We need to be able to talk about it openly, and acknowledge that, bad things were done, but we can do better. And then I just wanted to also say quickly, even though this is probably very long, the ones that I wanted to read this year. I don't think I'm going to get them all in this month, especially since the Young and Damned and Fair by Gareth Russell is one that I'm going to read in the third quarter, because it's about Catherine Howard, the fifth wife of Henry VIII, the one who was beheaded. Is her story. And so I want to read that when we get to the third quarter, because it's after the 1500s. And then I want to also read, if I can this month, I'm planning on doing Rough Beauty by Maria Cahill. And that is another story very similar to Nobody's Girl and Know My Name, about a girl who was sexually assaulted in Ireland, and has to take on that whole IRA to try to get her justice that she deserves. And so I'm going to read that one. I'll probably listen to it, because I actually just found out I have the book, but I found out that the author is the narrator to the audiobook, and I would really like to hear her story coming from her. And also Daughters of the Bamboo Grove by Barbara Denick, and that is about the Chinese history, where they only had the one child per household, but they wanted it to be male. So then what happened to all the the children, the daughters? And so it follows a family where one of the, she had twin girls, and one of the daughters was just disappeared, and it turns out that United States had this huge adoption boom for Chinese girls during that period, and the connection between that, obviously trafficking as well, because what are you doing with all these unwanted daughters? And then they were adopted to the United States, and the people in the United States adopting didn't realize the dark history and horrific experiences that led them to being able to adopt these children. And then the other one is Wild Swans, and that's Three Daughters of China by Young Chang. And that is essentially the history of China through 3 generations of women. And it's a true story as well, just like the Rough Beauty and Daughters of the Bamboo Groves. Those are all true, nonfiction, as well as the Catherine Howard story. It's her biography. So those are the ones that I want to read this year. The first one late in the year, but the next 3 I do want to get through this month for Women's History Month, so I can talk about it in more detail. I know this was not a happy journey, but I really wanted to talk about it, so I hope if you guys are still here, that at least some of you found some merit to this, some interest to this, maybe some books that you might want to look further into. And I'm sorry for the bummer, but I just feel like that we should have these kind of conversations, even if they're hard. Happy reading, and thanks for watching.